In the medieval imagination, the convent stood as a refuge, a bulwark of chastity, where women dedicated their lives to God behind stony cloisters and vows of silence. But from Yorkshire to Rome, records disclose that daily life for many nuns proved far more tangled and far less obedient than most presumed. Not all who entered the veil remained behind it in spirit. At the core of convent life lay rigid regulation. Caesarius of Arles, writing around 512, portrayed nuns as gems of the church, cloistered to shield against the spiritual wolves of the outside world. His Regula virginum set out their lives in exacting detail, rising before dawn for prayer, maintaining modest dress, eschewing vanity and chatter. Meals were meager, voices muted, movements restricted. The enclosure was not merely physical, it was spiritual discipline, a lifelong vow. But reality did not always mirror this ideal. Over time, some houses of religion slipped into disorder. By 1298, Pope Boniface VIII issued the decretal Periculoso, commanding all nuns to remain perpetually cloistered. The wording was blunt. Nuns must be guarded from occasions for lasciviousness, and their nunnish modesty must be preserved. Quick pause here. If this story's grabbing your interest, tap like and subscribe. It really helps me keep bringing you these tales. It was a defensive measure against temptation, against scandal, and perhaps against practices already occurring. Hidden within the quiet halls of some convents, forbidden acts unfolded. In the case of the Watton Priory in 12th century Yorkshire, one young nun, according to Elred of Revolx, went out a virgin of Christ and soon returned an adulteress. She had taken a lover, likely a lay brother, and was said to be with child. What followed was a dramatic mix of punishment, escape, and eventual absolution, recorded by Elred not as a warning, but a miracle. Even so, it exposed the fragile line between sanctity and human desire. And at Littlemore Priory in 16th century England, the veil ruptured completely. In 1517, ecclesiastical investigators uncovered a torrent of violations. The prioress, Catherine Wells, had borne a child with the convent chaplain and diverted church funds for a dowry. Nuns were confined in stocks, punished, or openly rebelled. One even burned her way free, and another confessed, "I am ashamed to be here under the evil rule of my lady." These were not whispered rumors. They were official records from church visitation transcripts, entered into formal comperta. Yet even amid disorder, daily rhythms endured, psalms recited, manuscripts copied, bread baked. Most nuns did not breach their vows, but when they did, it was not always loudly. It was often in silence, under cover of darkness, in locked rooms or letters smuggled through iron grills. Behind the veil, life was never only about virtue. It was about control, of space, of thought, of the female body. And where control proved harshest, resistance was rarely far behind. Convent dungeons, the secret trials behind cloistered walls. A woman vanishes from her convent in the dead of night. No crowd witnesses her departure. No records name her captors. Only a single phrase in a legal roll taken by persons unknown. But what transpired within the cloistered walls before she disappeared remains unwritten, and it is there, in the silence, that the shadow of the convent dungeon begins to coalesce. In medieval Europe, convents functioned as spaces of prayer, isolation, and obedience, but they could also become sites of punishment, places where transgression, whether imagined or real, met not public trial but secret correction. The walls that shielded virtue could just as easily conceal coercion. In 1304, at the Benedictine Priory of Clementhorpe in Yorkshire, a nun named Cecilia was reportedly taken by night. The record is spare. She was removed along with goods, and the culprits unnamed. 2 years later, at the Cistercian convent of Kirklees, another woman, Elizabeth the Hopton, was seized under similar circumstances. In both entries in the King's Justice Roll, the tone suggests not scandalous elopement, but covert abduction. And where convents enforced their own rules of discipline, one must ask, were these women attempting to escape confinement within? Centuries later, the mythos of the convent dungeon would explode into public imagination with Awful Disclosures, 1836, a sensational work by Maria Monk. She alleged that within the walls of a Canadian convent, nuns were kept in underground chambers, punished, silenced, and erased. Her lurid tales gripped the public, stoking waves of anti-Catholic fear across North America. The book was widely discredited, but its resonance reveals something deeper, a persistent suspicion that what occurred behind cloistered doors could never be fully known. Modern historians caution us not to conflate the mythical oubliette, a dungeon of no return, with the lived realities of convent discipline. Yet the concept persists. Even today, the idea of secret confinement in religious life captures the uneasy balance between piety and power. In truth, many convents lacked dungeons entirely, but others, especially those backed by wealthy patrons or powerful bishops, may have contained private chambers used for correction, for enforced silence, or simply for forgetting. The hair-shearing ritual, a symbol of dishonor. She kneels in silence, her head bows, and in a single, deliberate motion, the blade scrapes across her scalp, stripping away not just hair, but status, dignity, and identity. In the medieval world, to cut a woman's hair was never merely about appearance, it was ritual, and in many contexts, it functioned as a sentence. Hair was more than ornament. It signified honor, chastity, and even authority. Among Frankish royalty, uncut hair marked dynastic legitimacy. To shear a prince's locks was to strip him of the right to rule. But within the walls of convents, and in the hidden rituals of correction, the same gesture took on a darker tone. The Merovingian chronicles recount royal women entering religious life through the ceremonial cutting of hair. In one such case, a mother, renouncing worldly ambitions for her daughter, seized iron shears and shaped her child's hair into a crown, a gesture of sanctity. This was not shame, but sacred dedication. Yet in other contexts, the blade signaled disgrace. Medieval legal records and ecclesiastical accounts indicate that hair shearing could function as punishment, a mark of humiliation dealt to nuns who violated their vows. Though rarely detailed explicitly, scholars have traced a pattern. Women accused of sexual misconduct or rebellion might be forcibly tonsured, not in a holy rite, but as a punitive gesture meant to shame. This appears in penitential practices, where a married woman accused of adultery might be forced to present herself with hair disheveled or removed, signaling moral failure. Hair, once braided as a sign of virtue, became a canvas for dishonor. But even here, meanings collided. In the early Christian church, tonsure, shaving the crown or clipping the sides, remained sacred. It was called the double crown, a mark of devotion to Christ. For monks and nuns alike, the act signified renunciation of vanity and the world. A paradox emerged. The same blade could sanctify or disgrace, depending on who wielded it and why. In the end, the hair-shearing ritual concerned more than hair itself. It amounted to control of the body, of the soul, and of how one's story would be told. And once the hair fell to the stone floor, it rarely grew back with the same meaning. Across centuries, the convent was not merely a sanctuary. It was a battleground of obedience and defiance, silence and judgment. Within cloistered walls, sacred rituals could become punishments, and the symbols of faith could turn into instruments of control. The veil, the stocks, the shears, each bore meanings that shaped not only the fate of individual women, but the moral architecture of entire societies. These hidden acts did more than discipline bodies. They inscribed history in silence. How should we read the line between sanctity and suppression when the very rituals of devotion were used to punish dissent? Comment below. As the papal decretal Periculoso warned in 1298, nuns were to remain perpetually cloistered. that their hearts and bodies might be safeguarded in complete chastity. But when walls climb too high, even devotion can become a cage. Thank you for treading this trail of tales till we travel together again on another adventure.